All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 111th meeting of the BTNEP Management Conference here in Louisiana. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to remind everybody, in lieu of roll call, we had people sign up. So if you have not signed in the front back there, in the front back there, in the front behind me, please do so before you leave so that we record that who all was here in attendance. And I was also asked that when we make a motion, that whoever makes a motion also state their name for the record so that we can say who made the motion. With that, we've reviewed the approval. We have reviewed the agenda. I hope most everybody has. And I want to see who wants to make a motion to approve the agenda. Thank you, Christy Landry. Second.
Dwayne Bourgeois.
Thank you, Dwayne Bourgeois. Makes a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next is approval of the minutes from our 110th meeting. If everybody's reviewed the minutes, is there a motion to approve it?
Davey Bro,
Davey Bro first, anybody second? Haley Gamble seconds. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so this is our crawfish day, right? We also are going to approve the annual plan. And this is the role of the management conference. This is why everybody is here, that we are supposed to guide and approve what BTNEP does for the budget. So as they present the budget to us, I'd like to ask everybody to pay close attention. And if you have any questions about anything in the budget, you are more than welcome to ask them and have discussion of that. Also, I'd like to welcome and note two distinguished guests that we have here today. These are both former directors. We got Mr. Steve Matisse, and he's sitting next to Mr. Kerry St. Pete. So please, guys, don't talk too much to each other. I'm glad y'all are here. Thank you. With that, I'd like to go to any old business or announcements anybody might have. One once. Steve?
Yeah, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Steve Matisse, and I was the first director of the estuary program. And I just wanted to kind of talk about the legacy of just wanted to talk just a second about the legacy of the program. And just so that everyone here understands, okay, when we started this program nearly 40 years ago, that's before some of y'all were even born. You know, Kerry and I were here, I was the director, and he was chair of the scientific committee. What it took to develop that CCMP that we had. We had 4 standing committees, and those standing committees, they met one day a week, one day a month. So every week we had one of those committees meeting. And then we had to develop a briefing book for that committee meeting 2 weeks before it. So 2 weeks, every week, we were developing a briefing book for the meeting we were going to have 2 weeks in advance. And we were holding a day-long meeting with one of the committees. That went on for 5 years. And when we first started, and I kind of tell this story, when we had kind of the industry group, and the first time we set up, and you got to think about this, 40 years ago, the way we operated was, and I came from the Army Corps of Engineers, and our mindset was, you know, we have the goals, we make the rules, okay? And so when EPA came to me and recruited me to come and do this, and they talked about consensus-based decision-making, I had no idea what that was, okay? So we came here and we tried to figure it out. None of us knew what it was. If you look at the CCMP, you see that 250 people signed it, representing various organizations. That's how many people were actively involved in moving this program forward, okay? At the end of that, the development of that plan, everyone here needs to take pride in this, I think. We were one of 28 estuary programs around the country. We were the only one that developed our CCMP within the original time frame and the original budget. And that plan was judged by the American Planning Association as the best plan from a large jurisdiction standpoint developed anywhere in the United States, from any entity or anything like that. So that's where we started. I think we changed the way we made decisions in Louisiana by that that interaction that everyone had. And so I just kind of want to remember that, and because Carrie's here, Carrie, after all that time, went to DNR. And, when Carrie became the director, he was the director for 16 years. But when we were here, Wendell Curall was also part of this. And so between me and Wendell and Carrie, they would call us the good, the bad, the ugly. I was the good, Wendell was the bad, and Carrie was the ugly. Okay. And I will say, we had the most fun. It was joyous to be part of this organization, and it changed my life personally and changed my whole career and everything. I did. Because this program and sitting in this entity, this building, moving into the offices over there. And of course, we always had our meetings in the ground floor of the football stadium. Yeah, and that is the coldest room in the world, regardless of what the weather's like outside. That's the coldest, darkest room in the world. Remember that, Jerry? Yeah. And we, like I said, after every meeting, we all go down the Bubbles on the Bayou and have a great lunch with everyone. So it's just, I just wanted to say that. I don't get around very much, and Carrie and I were here together. Of course, he was much older than I was, so he was kind of. I was always looking at your mentor. He was, well, not really. When we first started, I remember when we first meeting, Carrie came in and he said, "You're a mentor. I don't know you. I've never heard of you. Why are you here?" I looked at him and said, "What the hell are you? I've never heard of you." And then from that we became this. So, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It's always good to be reminded where we came from and all the hard work that went into creating this wonderful organization. I appreciate that. Okay, here we are now at new business. I'd like to turn over to our director, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Gwen. Appreciate that. For the record, we were advised to separate these two, but we did take that advice. Hopefully it works out all right. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here again at our management conference meeting and see all of you here. It's a big day, obviously, for the program. We'll be presenting to you all our work plan for the upcoming fiscal year, in addition to a couple of great presentations from some speakers a little bit later on, and obviously crawfish, which we all enjoy. So excited to get on with all that and get to lunch. Thank you. So when we last met in February, I had the good fortune to introduce a new staff person, our deputy director, Michelle. She's sitting here with us today. And I'm excited to be able to make another announcement today. We have hired an education and engagement coordinator, Ms. Nikki Boudreau, who is here. She's sitting up front to my right. And we're very excited to have Nikki join the BTNEP team. Many of you know Nikki. She has been certainly in this community and around the estuary for many years. One of the things I heard early and often as I took this job my first months was that BTNEP needed to get back in the education game. It needed to be in our communities to a great degree. And so I couldn't be more pleased with the individual that we selected to help BTNEP take that next step. And move back into the communities and step up our education game than I am with Nikki. She has been here on campus as an instructor and an assistant professor for 24 years or so in the Department of Mass Communications. She served in a number of capacities, educating our young people in the estuary and of course guiding those folks, particularly as it relates to student media. She's currently until now, has served as the director of the Nancy Sanderson III Institute for Global Communications and helped to develop the environmental communications curriculum here at Nicholls. And again, couldn't be happier. I hope you all will have a chance. If you don't know Nikki, you will certainly have a chance to get to know her. Please introduce yourself, and I hope everybody will join me in welcoming Nikki to the BTNEP team. She starts on May 19th. Nikki, would you like to say anything?
All the stakeholders and team sides. So please reach out. I don't know when I'll have my email address active, but once it is, send me an email, let me know how. What is the offering, please send me opportunities to help me maybe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. Yeah, we've, so Vicky's doesn't start until May 19th, and she's already got about a dozen phone calls, so folks, want to talk with her about opportunities throughout the estuary. So again, very, very excited and, looking forward for the 19th to get here so that Nikki's on board full time. All right, moving along, we've got, just another, update, kind of 2 or 3 big announcements, I guess, over this last quarter, which has certainly been a busy one. Michelle and I had the opportunity to travel to Washington, D.C. Typically, the Environmental Protection Agency holds a meeting of the National Estuary Programs in D.C. And so that occurred this year at the end of March as well. To piggyback onto that and take advantage of all of the National Estuary Programs being in D.C., the Association of National Estuary Programs also held a workshop that we were able to attend, really focusing on sort of what's the elevator speech for the National Estuary Program, what's the why and the what, the why, and the why it's important. And so we were able to participate in that. It was Michelle and I's really first opportunity to get to meet other directors from around the country, and so it was excellent to start to build those relationships, be able to have discussions about them and how their programs are run, some of the issues that they may have, or positive things that they may have as well. That we can learn and bring back here to this program. So that was very nice to take part in. While we were there, of course, we also had the good fortune of meeting with all 8 of our congressional offices, who were very well received in all the offices. There is a Dear Colleague letter that's being circulated in Congress right now, or within the House, I should say. Bipartisan letter, bipartisan support for folks to support the National Estuary Program funding for fiscal year 26. We've heard that Congressman Carter, Congressman Fields have already signed on to that. Congresswoman, excuse me, Letlow has not. She's on appropriations, so typically would not sign a letter like that. But she has made an individual request for full support and full funding of the National Estuary Program for this upcoming year. That's great news. So have not heard back in terms of signing on the letter from Speaker Johnson, Majority Leader Squeeze, or Congressman Dickens. So if you know any of those folks that are in their offices, if you happen to know them and you're in support of what we do as a program, we certainly encourage you to reach out to them and let them know that you support, and you would hope that they support the National Estuary Program. So, and just a heads up, the program is up for reauthorization next year. So starting to lay the groundwork for that already. Another, of course, big event that we do each year, and was a very successful event this year, thanks to many of our staff working very hard to get this organized. And of course, all the sponsors that we had, all the volunteers that we had, was the Bayou Fish Cleanup. So that was held just about a month ago. We had what is, I believe, a recent record, at least over the last few years, in terms of volunteers. Over 500 folks participated in this on a Saturday morning, collected over 450 bags of litter. And I do believe the weight of litter that we collected was a record as well, 12 tons. So some of the more interesting things that were collected were countless tires. Those aren't necessarily interesting, but an easy chair, chainsaw. We found part of a skeleton, not a real one, a plastic one. A cattle trough and a wig. So some interesting items in the bayou. One wonders how some of those get there, but it's a great event to try to get in there and get that central and important waterway to the estuary cleaned up. 14 locations from Donaldsonville to Golden Meadow were active, so it was just a great event. It was a good success. I'm going to go through kind of rapid fire some of the other activities that we've undertaken in the estuary this quarter. Of course, we were at Eagle Expo in Morgan City. This is hosted by Cajun Coast. We had staff able to participate as part of that and provide some knowledge and some information, particularly as it relates to birds and eagles in particular. I was able to speak to them as well. At one point, of course, we had some of our staff participating in the Terrebonne Aquatic Clinic. At the end of February. This is sponsored by the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and the South Louisiana Wildlife Discovery Center. It's an opportunity for youth to get outdoors, to learn about the outdoors. I think they do boating safety, cast net instruction, demonstrations, instruction on fishing, and so forth. So that was a great thing to be involved in as well. You all know that we have Farm Fridays, the first Friday of the month. Of course, we had that in March, April, and May of this year already. But you see a couple of folks there repotting I believe those are black-eyed Susans, which if you've driven around the estuary here recently, you see they are popping all over the place. So beautiful plants, and happy to be able to grow those in our native plant facility. We participated in the Coastal Summit right here in this room in the middle of March. That was in large part due to the efforts of Vicki, who we just talked about, of course, and her students. This was actually a student-led event that was deemed the restoration generation that planned and actually executed this summit. I think they had, maybe 400 or so participants for the full day. Yeah. Lots of folks coming by. We had a lot of staff at the table there. You can see, of course, we had staff on panels, and I was able to speak to the group as well. So it was great success. We were happy to be part of it and help people learn a little bit more about the estuary, which we all live. St. Patrick's Day on the Bayou, participated in that as well. The West Side Gators from Walker, Louisiana, were at the farm. Had about 15 or 20 of those kids there helping to do some of the activities at the farm, helping to replant some things as well. We were at Brownell Memorial Park. You can see some of our staff there putting up prothonotary warbler boxes. We put about 30 boxes out, and understand that many of them are being used as we speak. Had an opportunity to, at the request of President Jackson, to talk to the Gulf Coast counties and parishes caucus that met here at the end of March as well. Talk with them about BTNEP and some of the things that the estuary program can do for counties and other parts of the Gulf Coast. So that was a good opportunity to share the message as well. You see on the left-hand photo there on the slide, folks at the Sugar Lab. That's again one of our staff talking with a group of 4-H students from all over the estuary. Had about a dozen students there learning all kinds of things. With Dr. Pompano, Dr. Farrar, and others. So that was a really good event. We were concentrating on some bird ID and some bird work there as well. Another Farm Friday you see listed there as well, of course. And then Bayou Fish Cleanup, which we mentioned, there's that easy chair that we were talking about. How in the world did that thing get in the bayou? What I really want to know is how they got it out of the bayou. I can't imagine how much that weighed. But then you see on the right-hand side there, of course, we had a couple of staff folks working with Christy Landry, who you heard from just a moment ago, making a motion with some lunch and learns at Fletcher related to invasive species and pollinator species as well. Getting near the end, folks, bear with me, but it's been a busy spring. So partnered with, of course, Lafourche Parish and Keep Lafourche Beautiful and cleaning up the Leeville boat launch. And then you see a couple of folks there on the right that work with Eve Abrams, who's producing podcasts to help spread the message about BTNEP and restoration coastal Louisiana. They're standing actually on Spanish Pass. That's the Spanish Pass and Ridge of Marsh Creation project that was completed a couple of years ago in Plaquemines Parish. It's the largest such project that the state of Louisiana has ever built, about 7 miles of ridge. You can see some of the plants there. We actually provided about 65,000, I believe, woody plants, species, trees and shrubs and so forth for that project. So they were out there checking out the progress and the success of those plants, which I'm happy to say was generally good. While they were there, they were actually able to get to what I believe is only the second ridge restoration project in Louisiana, second to the one at the port of the Grand Yard Marsh and Ridge restoration projects. And so we provided some plants for that project as well. Did some test planting out there, and Matt actually reported back that some of those trees are 15 plus feet tall now. So great news and great restoration of habitat that's so important to so many things throughout the estuary, particularly birds. Another volunteer group, about 15 or 20 people from SLB were at the farm earlier in the, or last month, I should say. And then an event that's near and dear to Miss Jean's heart, of course, the Grand Isle Migratory Bird Fest. We participated in that as well at the end of April. So, it was, by all accounts, a great event. Happy to have taken part in that. Of course, we partnered with the Nature Conservancy for many years and in many different efforts, but this really is Miss Jean's. Absolutely.
We had 140 species that were identified and marked on our list. That's really good. And the birds were scarce in the mornings, but we had an overflow in the afternoon. So it was a great success.
That's wonderful to hear, Ms. Jean. Certainly appreciate that. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that have said they've attended this event and just how great it is and how much they enjoyed it. So happy to have been a small part of that for sure. Again, the picture you see on the left there, that's from Grand Isle. I told Delaney I was going to tell you all that she's trying to sneak up on that bird. She actually is not. She's releasing it. That's a red knot. I believe that was part of a red knot recapture and banding, or capture and or recapture in banding effort just last week on Grand Isle. It was a successful trip there. Interesting to note, there was a bird that they spotted that Atlanta sent a picture to us of that had a flag tag, if you will, on its leg. And it was uniquely identifiable as a bird that had been observed in Chile. Later in the week, they recaptured that bird on Grand Isle. So we often talk about the importance of coastal Louisiana, not just to the state, but to the nation and even internationally. And that's why that bird has spent time in South America and is on, or was at least on Grand Isle just last week. So just an interesting and fun fact there, I think. So again, Farm Friday, we were at Blue Works, fortunate enough to be at Blue Works facility in Houma on this past Saturday. Tailing there, it was Meet the Fleet. It was a great day. I think they had 150 to 200 or so members of the public get by. They got to learn a lot more about Lumcon. We're able to get on their Lumcon's research vessel and look around, which I was able to do as well. It was pretty neat. And of course, see that new facility there in Houma, which is pretty impressive. And many folks were able to come and talk with us. There was a scavenger hunt to encourage folks to get around to each of the booths, each of the tables. And so a lot of folks got to learn about it that maybe hadn't otherwise. And last but not least, of course, we're continuously doing our sampling and water quality work throughout the estuary. You see a couple of folks there, Steve and Andrew, doing some of that sampling as we sit here today. And then lastly, and kind of the reason for the season, in addition to crawfish, of course, while we're here is we are going to present to you guys our work plans today. So just a couple of real high level things, and I don't want to steal the thunder of the staff who will be presenting most of this, but we had a very high success rate, or high submittal rate, if you will. What am I trying to say here? We had a lot of submittals this year. We had over 35 proposals that were submitted to us for both of these work plans this year, which is a high mark again in recent years. If we were to have funded all of those proposals, it would have been about $5.5 million worth of work. Obviously, hopefully you all know we don't have $5.5 million every year, so we're only able to fund about 20% of those. But it shows you the demand that there is out there for this kind of work, and strong partnerships, I think, that we've been able to foster with many of you around the table and certainly in the audience today. So we were fortunate to be able to fund 11 projects this year, and that's all I'll say about that, because we're going to get into a few more of those details here in just a bit. So that's all I have for my update today. Again, it's been a busy spring, lots going on. A lot of that stuff been going on with many of you in the room. Certainly appreciate y'all's efforts and those partnerships, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Okay, thank you.
This is here with the foundation report.
Hello, my name is Gary LeFleur. I'm the president of the Estuary Foundation, and I just wanted to share a few things with y'all. You know, what the foundation does is we help receive funds for the program. We partner with them for that, and we help administer those to many different projects. For instance, we are starting a new collaboration with Bayou Stim and Christy Landry. We're happy to help folks that are at the table here. That's one of the things we do. We help to support that Bayou Fish cleanup and the crawfish that we're going to share today. So that's one of the things that the Estuary Foundation does. We got through our tax season. Okay, that's good news when you're holding funds. And we had a few changes in our officer alignment that I wanted to share with you. So we still have some officers that are continuing to serve. That's Nolan Falco as the treasurer. That's an important position at the foundation. And Bill Erosh as the secretary. But we have a brand new vice president of the Estuary Foundation, and that is Dwayne Bourgeois. Thanks for doing that, Dwayne. All of those folks serve pro bono. They all have day jobs, but they don't mind working for the Estuary Foundation at night and in their gap time. We also elected a new board member, and so I'm happy to announce that Haley Gamble from Sea Grant is now Estuary Foundation. Raise your hand one more time. Thanks, Haley, for saying yes. And I just wanted to remind you that you'll probably be getting some email announcements from us for the White Boot Gala coming up in September. We usually do it around Estuary Day. And so it'll probably be a Tuesday in September at Spahr like usual, and you can just keep your eye out for that save the date notice. And that's it from the Estuary Foundation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Laura. Okay, we're gonna move into our next portion of the meeting, was the presentation of the draft 2026 base funding. And the other work plans that we have coming up. And so again, I would like to remind everybody, please pay close attention to what they're covering. And if you have any questions, any concerns, any comments, any support that you'd like to offer, please do so. Again, this is the job of the management conference now, is to review these plans and to put our stamp of approval on it. All right, Michelle?
Yeah, thanks, Quentin. So I'm gonna roll through the budget of our EPA 320 funds first. So these are our base funding. This is what we get every year. We don't actually know the exact number that we're gonna get until like probably about October, but we base the total amount on what we had in FY 25. So you see at the bottom, the total is $850,000. We're hopeful that that's what we're gonna get, and that's what we're going off of. So just to start, our Melancon indirect, which is 15%, is $106,313. And we've got personnel salary and fringe in this work plan. You'll see we don't have this category in our next work plan, but that's $263,000 for salary, $136,171 in fringe. We don't have any travel or equipment. We have travel in the next work plan. We do have 15,000 in supplies, and then the big one is what we consider other. This is our contracts and subawards. So we've got seven total awards for this work plan. So we have one contract. It's with Coney Resources. This is for an investigation in Lake Buff and Barrett, looking at aquatic vegetation. If you've got specific questions about these projects, please hold off. We'll have our action plan team needs give more details about each project. So don't worry, details are coming. But so that first one is for just under $75,000. And then we've got 6 subawards. The first one is a native plant education program to the Native Plant Initiative of New Orleans for $22,000. We're partnering with Glass Half Full out of Chalmette. We'll be putting recycling bins around the estuary. We're funding that one at $60,000. We've got a project with the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center for a summer camp for $30,000. We're doing wet shop again. This is one of our long running programs with Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Foundation for $20,000. We're also working with the Friends for the Traditional Louisiana Boat Building. This is actually going to be putting boats. I guess they've been in storage for a while, so now we're going to allow them to display their boats again. So that one's $27,500. And then working with Christy Landry with Bayou STEM on a teacher training for $37,818. Does anybody have any questions about the 320 funds? One thing I forgot to mention, so the 320 funds have to be matched 1-to-1 with non-federal dollars. So we are putting in a request for state surplus to match these. So the next work plan is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act budget. Previously, we've referred to this as our BIL funds, but now we're going with IJA. We've had these funds since 2023. So this will be our 4th work plan under the IJA. This year we had $910,600 total. As you can see, we still have the Melancon indirect, which is 15%, just like the 320s. That's just over $38,000. We didn't include any salary and fringe. We wanted to put those into 320 in our state general fund, but we did include travel in this. We have just a little over $11,000 in travel, and then $46,800 in supplies.
That category also covers some of our operating services. The more detailed breakdown is in the big work plan, but I can speak to that if you have any questions. But as you can see, the vast majority of these funds we wanted to put towards projects. So we're actually able to fund 4 relatively large projects in this work plan. So we've got the South Central Planning and Development Commission. This is the phase 2 of that home sewage assistance program that Brent spoke about earlier. This one is for $200,000. We're also funding a box turtle study with USGS for just under $200,000. We've got a feral hog removal project with USDA that's going to be removing feral hogs via helicopter and some ground removal. This one is $270,000. And then a water hyacinth management project with the LSU Ag Center for $144,000. These funds do not require any state match. It's just straight federal dollars that we can give out to the estuary. So really excited about that. Any question about the budget? Very great.
Michelle, Amy, would you like to come up and talk about the water quality action for the team? Thank you. That's working now. All right, the first project, and this is, we're going back to section 320 on page 2 of the handout. So Michelle ran through all of the projects, and so this is the first project on page 2. And so this is Lakes Buff and Barrett Aquatic Vegetation Investigation. The budget is for $74,935. And the performing organization that's requesting the funding is Comey Resources. And so this project came about because there were members of the foundation, that was, I think, Mr. Dwayne Bourgeois, and I forget who else.
Billy Rush.
Mr. Rush, that's right. Who had a huge interest in some of the vegetative dieback that was going on in Lake Buff. And then we had a gentleman who lives out in the lower Texas, who's an avid fisherman. And he's been noting just through personal observation, a die-off of SABs in that lake system. And so just from my work in the estuary program, we've been noticing over time a degradation of these large inland lakes like Lake Barrett and Lake Buff over time, and been getting these reports. And that's really what was the motivation for this project. So what they're aiming to do is to go in and collect some water quality and physical data in these lakes, and then look at some of the geospatial or GIS data that's available over time, and see if they can piece together a story to figure out what's going on in these two lakes. And then the next project I'm going to talk about, we're going to skip over to page 15. And that's under the budget for IIJA. And it's the first project, and that is phase 2 home sewage assistance program in the upper Barataria-Terrebonne watershed. So this is the second phase project
that's going to be implementing a cost share home sewage assistance program in the upper Terrebonne basin. And when I say upper Terrebonne, I mean, it's the part of the watershed that spans between, it starts at the Colonel's truck stop here in Thibodaux and goes down to the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway in Houma. So in the past, there was a previous organization that had collected some water quality data there. DEQ worked there in the past. We know that that's an area that has a lot of home sewage issues. Just as a reminder, most of us think, we move into a city, big city of Houma or big city of Thibodaux. We're thinking, oh, we're under a sewage system. It's all going to a sewage collection system. Most of Southeast Louisiana, most of Louisiana is not sewered. It's mostly under home sewage system treatments. Okay, and people are very inconsistent in the way that they manage or maintain their home sewage systems. So this project is trying to get at that issue. Most of our water quality problems come from these home sewage systems. I know y'all have heard me talk about this in the past. And so what this project does is it goes to the homeowner, and we offer to reimburse them for repairing their home sewage systems. So the project is going to be performed by the South Central Planning and Development Commission, and it's for $200,000. And I think I covered everything else as far as the description of the project. And if y'all have any questions on those two projects, I can answer those right now before we move on to the next. Anything at all? Oh, Gary, I was gonna ignore that question.
On a Lake Buff project, Andrew, I see they're gonna look at potential factors as herbicide use, sedimentation, and algae blooms. Are they not looking at the proliferation of apple snails?
Yeah, I think all of that's gonna be considered. It's not listed in here, but yeah, just to repeat the question, they're going to be, he's asking whether they're gonna be looking at apple snails. That was proposed as one of the causes of the loss of submerged aquatic vegetation. And Carrie, I'm really glad you brought that up. I was talking with the folks who were proposing the project before the meeting. And what they want to do is they want to solicit ideas and observations from people in the public. So that's a great one to kick it off. I'm sure they're going to make a note of that as one of the potential factors involved in the loss of vegetation in the Lake Buff system. So anyone else who's interested in this issue, I'm sure the contractors, the people who proposed this idea would love to hear from you going forward into the future.
Yeah,
Dwayne?
I just had, appreciate this project going in there. I have about 50 years of experience in that lake, and my dad has about 75 years of experience in the lake. And so several other of our friends pretty much grew up in that lake and watched it go from one direction to the other. So I just would make sure that we talk to the contractors about it and see how we could maybe get a session together to talk about the observation.
Well, I think, assuming that we do get funded for the work plan, once it's funded and once we get the contract moving, I think we're probably going to have, a group from this stakeholder group as well as whoever else is interested to meet, and then they can provide input into that project. I think that's a good way to do it. Yes, Haley.
My support, I get a lot of calls about vegetation, and I have two neighbors actually who have camps in Lake Buff. There are a couple of groups already formed that are like keeping Lake Buff beautiful and doing these things. So I'll be interested too in joining those groups. So just wanted to voice my support for that.
Well, thank you for letting us know about that, because I did not know about those groups, and we'll definitely try to get in contact with those groups. Anyone else? Yes, Gary.
I had a question about the Barataria-Terrebonne watershed project.
it says Bayou-Terrebonne, but it also says watershed, so are you, gonna be on each side of the bayou, like just to Bayou St. Louis and maybe to Gibson and Donner, or is that too far away from?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I can delineate the watershed for you right now, but there is a clear delineation of what a DEQ referred to as the Upper Terrebonne watershed. Yeah, and it is along Bayou Terrebonne. Thank you for asking that. Any other questions before we move on? All right, thank you very much for your time, and we have our next team member who's gonna come up. I think it's Emily, who's gonna come.
You only have section 320 proposed projects. So I'm not sure what page you're on, but I know the first one is number 3. It's the typical glass recycling program. This will be performed by Glass Half Full, and they're asking for $60,000. This project will fund glass collection and recycling to the typical area for 2 years. It'll put one 16-yard dumpster somewhere in the city and 21 smaller trash can sized toters in the city. So residents can recycle their glass for free to be sorted, processed, pulverized, and refined into beach-like sand to use for local coastal restoration projects and disaster relief efforts. The next project is Swamp Camp for 2026 and 2027. This is by the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center. They're asking $30,000 with other probable contributions of $12,000. So Swamp Camp is a week-long educational program for students in grades 4 through 7 that combines hands-on field trips and activities to teach about Louisiana's wetlands and industries that support the coastal economy through visits to industry sites and interactive lessons on topics like estuary management and native wildlife. Students gain both environmental awareness and insight into local career opportunities. And this funding will be for 2 years of summer camps. The next project is Wet Shop. This is put on by Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Foundation. They're asking $20,000 with other probable contributions of $38,000. So Wet Shop has been going on for, I think, since 1995. It's a week-long hands-on teacher workshop that trains educators on key coastal and wetland issues through immersive lessons and field experience. Participants will explore topics like coastal restoration, fisheries management, and wetland ecology. Then they will return to their communities to implement student and community-based stewardship projects. So ultimately, they're estimated to reach about 40,000 students across Louisiana through going back and doing these projects. Number 6 is Cajun and Native American traditions, passing on our heritage. This will be performed by Friends for Traditional Louisiana Boat Building. They're asking $27,500. So this project aims to preserve and share the cultural heritage of the Barataria-Terrebonne estuary system by engaging students and the public in hands-on activities like paddle making, boat building, storytelling, and traditional crafts. So before Hurricane Ida, they were housed in Lockport, and now all most of it in storage. So this will fund a temporary museum and workshop that will be open at the Illinois Charles resettlement, where Cajun and Native American traditions will be taught and demonstrated in collaboration with local residents. And the last project is the Barataria-Terrebonne investigations, integrating local phenomena into teacher trainings. This will be by Bayou STEM. They're asking $37,819 with a probable contribution of $7,600. This project will provide a 4-day summer workshop to help 6th and 12th grade science teachers deliver hands-on, place-based lessons using local environmental topics aligned with Louisiana science standards. Teachers will participate in field investigations, content training, and lesson planning focused on water quality, ecosystems, infrastructure, and landscape change in the Barataria-Terrebonne estuary. The program aims to improve science instruction and student engagement while supporting teachers with materials and online professional development. That is the 5 community engagement projects, and I'll take any questions now.
Any comments, questions?
Great. Thanks. I think, Delaney's coming up next.
Resources under EPA 20, there's going to be a native plant education program from 2026 to 2028. This is essentially a continuation from a project that was initiated by the Native Plant Initiative of Greater New Orleans. They are asking for $22,000. They're going to be giving away native plants and native plant seeds and doing educational outreach in the communities of Greater New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Terrebonne Parish, and St. Bernard Parish. Essentially, they expect, I guess, the minimum is going to be 6 distribution events that are going to give away at least 12,500 native plants and 4,000 native seed kits. There's going to additionally be, this year, they're adding on a component of 6 professionally produced audio and video podcasts that are going to focus on native plants, educating people about them and how they can distribute them in their communities. The next project is a IIJA project called Population and Movement Ecology of Gulf Coast Box Turtles. That's on page 15, by the way. The proposal was initiated and submitted by United States Geological Society. This is a research project that's going to combine research with community engagement. And the cost, the requested amount was $199,150. And there is also other probable contribution of $54,000. This is an interesting project in terms of getting more information. There's not been a lot of research on the Gulf Coast box turtle in this region, so it's going to focus on like in I guess Plaquemines Parish, and look at try to figure out or find what population estimates are, the home range and habitat that these creatures use, and if there's any disease prevalence, as well as a genetic analysis that could show that this particular species in that area is endemic. It's a subspecies that might be not anywhere else. So, anyone has any questions?
Any questions, comments for Delana? Okay.
And last but not least, so see Michael Massamy with the basic species.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. The invasive species action plan team received 7 proposals. 5 of those were for IIJA projects. 2 were for 320 projects, and the 320 projects, neither one of them got one. We ended up with 2 selected projects, both in IIJA. They start on page 16 of your packet. The first one is Seek and Destroy, removal of feral hogs from the Barataria Basin via helicopter and ground-based operation. So this was submitted by David Curtis from Wildlife Services of APHIS at USDA. This is a program that's kind of been ongoing, but their funding is a little bit hit or miss, up and down over the years. Some years they skip our area entirely. Some years they come, maybe once a year if we're lucky. But this large amount of funding is going to support a very concentrated effort to remove feral hogs from what I would consider the most sensitive area. It's kind of like the nutrient control program, right? There's millions of nutria all over Louisiana, but we focus on the coast because that's the most critical area where they're causing the most damage. So David's going to focus on the barrier shoreline of Barataria, mostly in the eastern part near the port. Amanda Phillips helped a lot with this proposal, so we have a lot of buy-in from Wisner and from the board, of course. and then some of the islands and buried shorelines to the east as well. So this will result in, they're gonna trap wherever they can trap, and where trapping is not appropriate, there will be helicopter operations to remove feral hogs. So that's the most efficient and dollar per hog way. It's the most efficient way to remove hogs. So this will result in 3 full years of kind of a D-Day type storm the beach effort to push hogs back off of those critical areas. I was talking to the manager of Elmer's Island Refuge, Julia Leitner, the other day, and she was telling me how people don't really understand how significant the damage is from these hogs, the terrapin nests that they raid, coastal restoration projects that they uproot. So fortunately, hopefully this money comes through and we'll have 3 full years of intensive control of the buried shoreline. Jean, you have a question?
I have a question. Has Fifi Island behind Grand Isle been considered for any of that investigative work? Because we know that there are feral hogs over there. Local people have turned them loose on that island. They're destroying the mulberry trees and live oaks that have been planted over the years.
Very sorry to hear local people have turned them loose. Yes, so
I would name names if I could.
not in the enforcement game like that, but maybe we can talk later. Yes, so one of the first steps of this project is going to be a monitoring component. So we're going to figure out exactly where all the hogs are before we just kind of go nuts with the traps and stuff. So yes, I'm sure Fifi is going to be part of this program.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the hogs? All right, and the final project is enhanced water hyacinth management through remote sensing and augmented biological control. So water hyacinth is after over 100 years, is still a major scourge in our waterways. There are several biocontrol insects that have been released on water hyacinth. At least 3 that I know of back in the 70s and 80s were released. Those are well-established populations. You often see water hyacinth with leaf damage. Those are the biocontrol agents that were released decades ago. There's a new one. It's not brand new. It's been around for about 10 years or so. Megamelus scutularis. It's called the water hyacinth plant hopper. And it's completely host specific, lays its egg on water hyacinth. The nymphs feed on the water hyacinth, the adults feed on the water hyacinth, and they complete their life cycle on water hyacinth. They've had tremendous success in other countries with this organism. The success in the United States has been a little bit hit or miss, but there's a new strain. So this animal, of course, comes from South America, where the water hyacinth is from. There was a Argentinian strain that was not very heat tolerant. There's a Paraguayan strain that has much better heat tolerance. It would be more suitable in our location. They're having success with this organism in Florida. And so LSU has already gotten the first few shipments of the Paraguayan strain of this insect. And through this project, they will establish their greenhouses, establish populations of water hyacinth and the insect, and release them in high density numbers. So it looks like the pattern so far has been widespread releases don't result in a whole lot of control, but concentrated focused releases of high numbers and high densities of this insect has a lot of control. So that's going to be the goal of the program. And there's also an aspect of this project that has drone imagery and machine learning to identify areas of damaged plants. We've had a lot of success with the Salvinia weevil as well through LSU. So we'll be piggybacking onto that program. Mr. Singh?
Michael, this new biological control, does it do more damage than the weevil did on the
Yeah, it's hard to compare. The Salvinia weevil, I think the techniques for getting them out into the field are going to be pretty different.
I'm talking about the weevil that was released in the 70s.
Oh, yes. Yes, it does more damage than those. The hopes are very high that this is going to be more successful than the previous biocontrol agents. But again, the trick is going to be what density of numbers can we really get out into the field.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Eric?
Do y'all have does BTNEP have input as to the target areas that are gonna get like prioritized for release?
I'm sure that we could absolutely have input if we decide we want to go that way. Right now, I think they're proposing, doing a lot of work in the national park, as on the feet. But if we have other areas where we want to target, I think that's absolutely doable. You have something in mind specifically?
I just want y'all
Yes.
to be able to prioritize.
Yeah, we'll be working closely with, this is, Rodrigo Diaz, who we have a lot of experience with, and, Yvonne Rahalva, who was a recent hire, who's working at LSU. Yes.
Do they reproduce quickly, or do you have to constantly introduce them from somewhere else? Or once you get them going, will it just keep going on its own?
So yes, the idea behind this more heat tolerant population is that they will establish, and you won't need to augment the population, except they're calling this augmented control, because you do have to re-release. The densities that you want to control the insect is greater than the natural density that would normally occur. So when you release a lot of these insects all at once, you get a lot of control for that year. And then the population may decline. So yes, it probably will require multiple releases, even though the population of the insect is established. So there's like a baseline level of control that you can expect from just the established wild population, but you'll get exceptional control with increased releases. Yes.
Just building off of Gary's comment, I mean, while I think it's good for you to have some say in where a release takes place, you also have to recognize the importance of the land ownership and where that release happens. So if there's already an agreement in place to do it with the park, that's the best scenario for a controlled study to see. Because, while we think that this is going to have positive benefits, there's always a chance. There have been many other types of, biocontrols that have been added in the past that have not necessarily been contained. So while I think the scope of this budget is not going to be one where this is going to be done broadly across the entire estuary. But if there's already an agreement in place, it looks like the park is a partner in this, as is Jefferson Parish, that's where you want to go for it. Because this is basically a large scale pilot site. And so I think that land ownership agreement to allow this project to take place is something you really want to consider.
Agreed. Thank you all. All right, thank you, Michael. And I want to take a moment to thank all of the BTNEP staff that have led up these different action plan teams and the volunteers that help review each of the projects. So if you're not familiar with it, people who want to submit a proposal, submit their proposal. It is reviewed by a team of volunteers led by each of the BTNEP staff members for their particular action plan. They go through a process, they have meetings, they discuss, they get the proposals to come in and present their plan. So this is a pretty thorough process that's going on. I really want to acknowledge and thank the staff for putting this together and selecting some outstanding projects for us to discuss right now. So thank you all. Okay, so this is our job right now. We've heard their budget, we've heard their proposals, and we heard the types of projects they want to propose. Is there any discussion or any comments that anybody would like to make at this time?
Quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
Again, echo the thanks. This is a great effort by the BTNEP staff and team to put this list of things together. So I just wanted from the conference side, say that I appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you. Nice comments. Anybody else? So what we're going to do, there's no more comments. You can always cut me off. Is we're going to have someone make a motion to accept this entire budget. Every plan that was presented today, we're not going out in mind. We're going to accept the whole budget. I'm going to remind you, if you make the motion, state your name for the record. And then we'll have a second. We'll have time for more discussion if you want to, and then we'll vote to approve it. So anybody want to make a motion?
Ernie Blanchard, Ballroom Freshwater District Vice Chairman. I move we accept these as presented.
Great. Do we have a second?
Dwayne Bourgeois, second.
Thank you, Dwayne. Is there any discussion at this time? All in favor of accepting the budget as proposed? Anyone not in favor? Okay, it passes by consent. Thank you all. Very good. Yay! That was a lot of work. Good video. Okay, we've got a couple of presentations today, and, it's okay, we're going to like to introduce Dr. Earl Melancon. Dr. Melancon has been a longtime mentor for me when, Elise and I first started at Nicholls. He gave us a bunch of aquaculture and tanks that we used. He's always been there for knowledge, and he's probably one of the most knowledgeable persons about oysters, not just from a science point of view, but also from a practical commercial production point of view. He's always a pleasure to talk with. At one point, he was the president of the BTNEP Foundation, so he's always been a huge supporter of this organization. And it's my pleasure to introduce you, Dr. Earl Melancon.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm going to talk about oysters for a few minutes, but I have a question for you, Mike. Next year, besides crawfish, will we also have an oyster? I mean, I just want to plant that seed now. Okay, all right, so let me put my glasses on. I don't have a monitor in front of me, so I'll have to turn around to see the pictures, so I can remember what I put together. They gave me where I was advanced the slides, so thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about a fishery that some of you may know about, but most of you don't know about. We call it alternative oyster culture here in Louisiana. And I've been privileged through Louisiana Sea Grant for the last 5 years to lead a program to try to kickstart this fishery in Louisiana. It's very well established on the west coast of the United States, the east coast of the United States, and we're seeing it blossom across the Gulf in the last 15 years. And in particular, Louisiana for the last 5, based on a lot of stimulus from the state in words of grants and everything, and that's what I'll talk about. It's called alternative oyster culture here in Louisiana. Everywhere else in the country and everywhere else in the world is referred to as off-bottom oyster culture. And it's essentially using hatchery spawn oyster larvae that become small oysters that are put in cages that are eventually sold on the market, primarily as a half-shell oyster for either eating raw or grilled. The reason we use the term alternative oyster culture exclusively in Louisiana is because, if you're not aware, we have a traditional oyster industry that is second to none in the United States. We produce anywhere from 35 to 45% of every oyster consumed in the United States here from Louisiana. And we're actually the envy of the world between the public-private sector in terms of the way state government and the private industry has developed this industry. So we have to say that this is alternative. And I'll start by telling you this in no way is a fishery that will ever replace the traditional historical 200-year fishery we have. But it does offer, if you look at this title, it says alternative oyster culture, helping an industry diversify. If you have an industry that becomes static, like any business, you're going to have problems in a society that moves at the speed of light, the way we do today. What is AOC? I pretty much told you a little bit about that just now. It's growing oysters in cages, typically off bottom. We do have a few that will put cages on the bottom, but it's still referred to as off bottom because they're in cages and it's a hatchery spawned product. It's not a wild spawned product. As I said, why alternative? This is not going to replace the historical oyster industry. We have economists that have been working with us, and we think that if we can get this up in full blown, the way we see it on the East Coast and the West Coast, perhaps they can contribute as much as 4 or 5, maybe even 6% of all the production that occurs in Louisiana. So please let me stress from the very beginning that this in no way is an alternative to our historical 200-year. It's an added aspect to it. And that means we have to preserve our estuarine habitats, not only for this unique little fishery, but for commercial fisheries, estuarine fisheries throughout the coast.
Some of the advantages though, in this area, this is where I really like this, we're gonna look at some stuff in Grand Island just a way, because it really got its start right here in your backyard. Traditional oysters are not found in the high salinity waters. If they are, they're just planted there for a small, planted there for a small amount of time, grown to get fat and then harvested quickly because of predators. So if you have these guys in cages, it helps to prevent some of that predator and disease stuff. So we're able to use different habitats here than what you generally see in the traditional fishery in some sorts. It's something that we pride ourselves on in Louisiana, as long as it doesn't become too eutrophic, where we have too much algae growing. This is not considered a food deficit environment in coastal Louisiana. We have a lot of food that oysters love and a lot of phytoplankton. And when you go to the East Coast, when you put an oyster in the cage that's probably 1/20th of an inch in size, it'll take probably 20 months or more to get it to an oyster ready for the consumer. Here in Louisiana, with our growing temperatures and our great food, we can do it in about 8 to 10 months. So you see the advantage we have here in the Gulf, and particularly Louisiana. And it is, you're going to hear a word later on when I show you a short presentation as a video. You can hear the word boutique oyster. And essentially what this means is that it's an oyster that is for a very special market, a half shell trade, maybe like a real oyster. And the oysters that generally come out of the cages, generally no more than 2.5, 3 inches in size, because they want to get the oysters out of the market or on the market as quickly as they can, so they can have turnover for the next cycle. So it's not like the wild oysters where you might see that 3.5, 4 inch grilled oyster on your plate. So there is a preference. Some people go with smaller oysters, other people like the larger oysters. We'll leave that up to you. Louisiana Sea Grant has been working with off-bottom oyster culture in an experimental stage till at least at 2005, when we really began to do this down Grand Island. But in 2012 was the first time we had official permitting processes and things like that occurring. And by the time Hurricane Ida came along, or prior to Hurricane Ida, we had about 9 people who were in this fishery. Very small, usually no more than 100 to 200 cages. All of them were pretty much located in the Barataria system, and the majority were located around Grand Island. Here comes 2021 with Hurricane Ida, and it wiped out every single one of those 9 farms. I mean, totally wiped them out. Fortunately, before Hurricane Ida hit, the state legislature had asked Louisiana legislature to develop, or asked the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries to develop a strategic plan for the oyster industry, because of all the coastal restoration initiatives that are occurring. And one of the initiatives was to look more intensely at off-bottom oyster culture, AOC. So they came to Sea Grant and asked Sea Grant to lead this project, and I was privileged to be asked to lead that aspect of the Sea Grant effort. And so over the last 5 years, just as Hurricane Ida was hitting, we were able to also put grants out there to try to stimulate this fishery. And we were able to get all 9 of those farmers back on the water because of grants, and even add to it, so that we, by the time the 3-year grant process ended over the last 5 years we've been working on this, when it ended in 2023, we had 17 farms that were in the state. This graph at the top there kind of shows you, it's a graph that shows you how the acreage has developed in the years, starting from 2012, even from 2005 with the experimental 5 acres that we had. we have now about 200 acres. It's grown a little over. 200 acres that's actually permitted. It doesn't mean that there's 200 acres of actually cages out there. You might have a farmer that has 5 acres and has 1 acre of actual cage production going on. Okay, the general size of these farms in Louisiana are small. They're 1 to 2 acres. Some are even a half an acre. We have 2 big players in here who are at about 5. One is at 40 acres. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. We have about 19 to 20 active now in the business. Hatchery spawn product. This is not Mother Nature giving you the oyster. We are blessed in Louisiana where we still have a spawning population of oysters. We still have enough oysters in our estuaries that when the spawn does occur, we can get a good recruitment and we can still lead the nation in oyster production. When you deal with cage oysters, you have to start with a very small oyster. It's not commercially, economically viable to go out there and try to harvest a worm or small set oysters called spat oysters from the wild. You have to rely on hatchery spawn. And we do have a hatchery here in Louisiana that's run by government, run by Wildlife and Fisheries and Louisiana Sea Grant. And it's on Grand Isle. And they're up and running and full blast right now, spawning oysters and raising them. Most of the oysters spawned at the hatchery are used in coastal restoration. They're used for spat on shell for Wildlife and Fisheries, or they're used in coastal restoration for living shorelines. It's not for the commercial industry. We supply to the commercial industry here in Louisiana and across the Gulf only when there is a shortage of glory coming from the hatcheries around the Gulf. And we do have 1 hatchery that's private here in Louisiana, and it's a very unique hatchery. It's a recirculating aquaculture system hatchery, and it's actually in Baton Rouge. And some years they're successful, other years they're not. But I can also tell you that every hatchery, whether it be West Coast, East Coast, or Gulf Coast, including Louisiana, some years you have a good year, some years you have a bad year. So that's why we're there to help supplement when there is a need. We don't want to compete with the private industry. We want the private industry to take over this eventually. Most of the farmers in the state right now are in what we call parks. And I'll explain a little bit more of that. And that's what that video I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. This is a hard slide to see up here because of the brightness, but it's just showing, it's hard to show this. I'm going to kill anybody with a laser. Here's Plaquemines Parish. We have an aquaculture park in the lower part of Calcasieu Lake. This is the coast of Louisiana, and this is just a grown-up area around Grand Isle in the lower part of eastern Terrebonne. And Cameron Parish, that park is an aquatic park, 50 acres, roughly 50 acres in size, and it's totally leased out, and it's run by the Cameron Parish Coastal Authority, Port Authority. Sea Grant worked very closely with them, and those farmers are up and running and doing well. But it started, and the majority of farms are in the Barataria system, and 1 or 2 in the Terrebonne system, 2 in the Terrebonne system, and that's what this load up, this load up area here from the Grand Isle area, and so what you see right here. Let me tell you that the majority of farms are in the aquatic park at Grand Isle. And this park is administered by Grand Isle Port Authority. And again, we work very closely with them, as does Wildlife and Fisheries. And those farms are roughly 1 to 2 acres in size. And I'll show you that. Extension. You get a lot of calls from people saying, I hear that there's a new fishery in town. And I've got $1 million in my pocket, And I am going to invest that $1 million, and I'm going to ask that you can guarantee me that I'll make $2 million in 5 years. And I say, excuse me, can we have a sit down and talk about this? Then you have a legislator who comes to you and says, Earl, we just gave UNC grant $3.5 million, and what are we getting in return? Why don't I see 40 farms out there? And why don't I see everybody talking about AOC oysters? And my answer to them is, sir or ma'am, can we sit down and have a deep discussion about this? It's a fishery that is established on the East Coast, it's established on the West Coast, it's established in Alabama, in Florida, it's starting up in Texas, we're ahead of Texas, it's in Mississippi, but none of those people have the traditional oyster fishery we have here in Louisiana. So my first discussion with anyone who wants to get into this business is you're going to be competing locally with restaurants and wholesalers and processors that are getting oysters by the sack. We are a fishery here in Louisiana that is a volume fishery. In other words, we sell oysters by the sack. These small bottom oyster culture people sell oysters by the individual oyster. So a sack of oysters might have 220 oysters, maybe 240 oysters in it, they're not cheating you. And that sack might go for $40. So that means your oyster is what, maybe 30, 40 cents a piece. You gotta make a profit. You're gonna go through all this trouble with the cages and everything else. It's not like Mother Nature's doing this for you. You work your blood off this stuff. You gotta continually turn these oysters because there's fouling on these cages from barnacles and seaweed and everything else. Also, it was learned very quickly on the East Coast and the West Coast. You gotta compete on a market. You better put an oyster that's not a good fat oyster out there, but also has a beautiful shell, and a shell that's not brittle and breaks very easy. Well, in these cages, these oysters grow, but they're not gonna grow with a nice shell, with a nice cup, deep shell, so that when you get a grilled oyster, you can have that butter in the bottom of that shell, so you can sop it with your drink there. The only way you're gonna do that with these oysters is you gotta get out there and tumble these cages. So we're talking about, you put cages out there, you're out there twice a week at least, and certainly once a week tumbling them, and maybe once a week having to just turn them over so that you can dry the top of the cage to kill the barnacles and kill the algae. So there's a lot of work involved with this, okay? So for these guys to make a profit, they're getting $1 an oyster. They're getting 85 cents an oyster. You say, well, I would never spend that kind of money for a good oyster. And each one. And they're selling them in bags of 50, bags of 25, and then they're selling them to restaurants where they're buying 100 count box, and they're getting $1 a piece, and the restaurant's selling them for $3.50 a piece. Because they can get it. So there's money to be made. But you work your tail off for it. So if you want to do this, write in. Okay, so, you know, when they asked me to take this over 5 years ago, I don't have a crystal ball, but one of the first things I asked, because I've worked with the oyster industry for a long time in the traditional industry, do you have any economic studies to tell me how this is going to work in Louisiana? And the pundits who came to us with all this money looked at me and said, no. I said, well, do you think we need to do a study? Maybe. Because nobody wants to guarantee you're gonna get money. We did do a study. And we got Dr. Dan Cotillion from Mississippi State University. Dan has worked with the oyster industry for off-farm and traditional for a long time. He's a great guy. And I asked Dan, I said, Dan, work with CGRAT, Louisiana CGRAT, and let's come up with a study. And he did, and he's economic, he's an economist. So economists work with numbers. Okay? I work with numbers, but I also work with fishermen. And I work with people who have salt in their blood. And who will do this even when their profit margin is not that great. If you don't believe, ask any shrimper. But they still shrimp. You still got people in the commercial industry. So the economists came and Dan said, Earl, he said, this is not gonna work. Here's my study. You say these guys are at 1 or 2 acres each. He said, these guys are not producing enough to get a good profit margin. And I'm telling him, they're making a profit and they want to stay at it, 2 acres. He said, you gotta go at 4 acres or more. So we have 2 individuals in the state right now who are invested or who are investing hundreds of thousands of dollars and are putting in thousands of cages. Okay? They're gonna be on this end, where they're going to be looking at millions of oysters being sold. Whereas on this end, with 1 or 2 acres, they're gonna be selling at the 100,000, 50,000, maybe 200,000 oysters at the end of the year. Well, then you can still look it up and say, wait a minute, Earl. If you're telling me that this guy on an acre is gonna sell 50,000 oysters, that's $50,000 in a dollar a piece. Double that to 100 oysters, 100,000 oysters, that's $100,000. I do have one fisherman who took last year on 2 acres, excuse me, 1 acre. He sold 180,000 oysters. So, oh, wow, $180,000 on an acre? That's better than soybeans and corn. That's better than anything. I'm gonna get in this industry. And I'd say, whoa, wait. He got 180,000 this year. The year before, he got 30,000. Next year, he might not do it well. Mother Nature is gonna rule this. Hurricanes are gonna rule this. At one time, we had people saying, this may take over the traditional industry because the traditional industry has to worry about fresh water all the time. Now we can move these guys all the way out in the Gulf where there's salt water, or we don't have to worry about fur grading because they're in cages, they're mobile. They can be moved out harm's way. Let's poo-poo that right now. It doesn't work that way, okay? A lot of infrastructure in these cages. You can't just get up and move these guys. It just doesn't work. So it goes on and on. So what I'm getting at here is that there is this thing called economy of scale. And when Dan Petrolia as the economist did this, he said, if you want to make this an industry, you have to go with economy of scale. And economy of scale means you got to go with the big farms. And I come back and tell them, let's do that. But let's always keep them with their eyes wide open how you do this. But also understand that the majority of these guys will always be what we would like to call the mom and pop type of operations. 1, 2 acres. Because some of these guys have other things they're doing. Some of these guys are commercial crabbers, and they do this as well. Some are commercial shrimpers, and they do this as well. One is a commercial fishing guy, and he's doing this. Another one is a restaurateur, and he's doing this. Another one is an alligator farmer, and he's doing this. So this is like they're making supplement money. And then there's some who are retired. And I'm saying, you're always gonna have those people in that because there's salt water in their blood. It's not always going to be economy of scale. It's always in their blood. So what got me excited about this was what we've been doing with Grand Isle and Cameron Parish in the Port of Cameron. In Grand Isle, when I started as a young biologist, when people, tourists, or anyone went to Grand Isle, they talk about getting seafood in terms of crab, shrimp, and oysters. By the 90s, tourists and people were saying, even the locals were saying, I'm going to Grand Isle to get crab and shrimp. Oyster was no longer on the plate. That's because the oyster industry, the traditional oyster industry of Grand Isle went to the wayside. Simply because of economics and the way of trying to better oysters in the rural part of Grand Isle, just didn't pay for them to do it. So what this has done is put Grand Isle back on the market and on in your face in terms of we've got oysters again. And I'm gonna shut up now because I know I'm between crawfish and you. And I'm gonna just move on. Just to give you some idea, you gotta get hatchery seed. Look at this. R1s. Nobody really wants an R1. That means that it's a oyster that's out of shell. So almost, but it's one that's gonna be retained on a 1 millimeter screen, 1/25th of an inch in diameter screen. That's an awfully small oyster. Generally, they want to get R2s or they prefer R4s. For 1,000 R4 oysters, it's from a hatchery, it's gonna cost you $20. Now, if you've got a couple of thousand cages out there, or even a couple of hundred cages, and you are only, by the time you get to an oyster to market, and figure about a 30% loss, okay? Of that 20 oysters, of that 1,000 oysters, let's say 200 to 300 of them are never gonna make it to market. Sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's less, I've seen both. But let's say on average, 30% won't make it to market. So that's even more expensive than what you're seeing up here, okay? You've got a couple hundred cages, and you only, by the time you get them to market, you have 250 oysters at most in a cage. Now we figure how many cages you have and how many oysters you gotta buy. We have orders in right now for 100,000 seed. We have orders in right now for 1 million seed. We have orders right now for 3 million seed. Multiply that other number you're seeing up here. It takes money to make money, is the old saying, and it's true. Okay, but you ain't gonna get rich on this. Maybe 1 year out of 5, that's good. But you also fall, but you'll tell you the same thing. 1 out of 5 don't necessarily cut it. So you gotta understand the realities. History that's gonna still be here years to come. Yes, I truly believe that in my heart. Will it never be it? Has to be seen. That's up to the individual. Will it always be the mom and pop operations? I firmly believe that those 1 acre, half acre, 2 acres, they're gonna be there. Will these big, multi-million big farms be there? That's hard to say. I can tell you that most farms I see on the west coast or the east coast and the Gulf right now, they're more than 1 or 2 acres. They're the mom and pop operations. Those guys who are big are very big, and they can absorb losses. But they make a lot of money when they can't make it too, you know, so, but they're few and far between. I think the majority will be these small operations. My own person. I'm gonna stop there and go to this. We work with Jefferson Parish Economic Development Council to JEDCO, Jefferson Parish Economic Development Corporation. They did a branding campaign for the Grand Isle oysters. All of these farmers have their own oysters, their own brand, their own name. But what we did with Grand Isle was work with the Port Commission and JEDCO and say, let's come up with an overall branding name for the island and for this area, so that you can still have your own name, but we can come up with our overall name. And they came up with Grand Isle Jewels. So if you go to a restaurant and you say, do you have all kind of oyster culture, oysters? You could ask, do you have Grand Isle Jewels? Or you can actually ask for a specific one within that Grand Isle Jewel. It's an umbrella term, okay? And it's amazing. All of these farms, every guy, every woman out there is cultivating their oysters a little differently because turning them more often, doing more work with them. And they have a little different character. And any given day, they'll have a little different flavor. So you can have two farms right next to one another and have different characteristics that might be just what you're looking for if you're a connoisseur of oysters. So we have this. One thing I did discuss at the very beginning, I wish I would have, a slide, that very first slide, had an individual on there named Jules Walson. Not related to him. But Grand Isle Jules is based on Jules' name. Jules was the one who did the experimental work back in 2000. He's a traditional oysterman. Comes from a long line of traditional oystermen on Violet Fish. Got interested in doing this with Seagrams after 2005. He started with some experimental stuff. He passed away a year ago. And all of the farmers got together and said, how do we honor this man who really started us in Louisiana? And they said, well, let's do a play on his name. And we came with the Grand Isle Jules, okay?
Grand Isle oyster, the best oyster in the world, is grown. This is where alternative oyster culture began. Really savory, sweetness. I'll put mine up against anybody's. That's your doubt. You think you got a better oyster? Come on, we got this. Grand Isle is where it started. It's where the oyster, the all-final oyster industry took shape and has grown to where it is today. It captures just a bit of history on a new, different way of growing oysters here in Louisiana. Look at Grand Isle on the map, we're the last little spit of land, pretty much in Louisiana.
People come here to eat oysters, and it's very gratifying to see people eat out oysters, and they want more oysters, or they want to lease oysters and grow oysters on our farms.
There have been some really nice grants that have come about through LSUC grant and, a few other organizations. So that's really what's kind of spurred a lot of new farmers coming down here. I started this about 8 years ago as a hobby, once I retired from corporate America. And I love it. My wife says, you never get time to talk to my oysters, but I do.
What makes the Grand Isle oyster special is the water quality of Grand Isle.
We get lots of good salt water from the Gulf coming in at every high tide.
Regardless of where the farmer is being deceived, it's really the water of Grand Isle that's making the Grand Isle oyster.
Just a good salty, clean, smaller than average oyster, which is kind of a not your usual Louisiana oyster. Creamy, buttery, soft boil, and egg type texture to the oyster. A lot of people crave that. We haven't really been delicate with ink shell versus the wild oysters have this really gnarly, thick shell. We've introduced a lot of newbies to oyster eating, and they love it. That's what I'm most proud of.
Very happy to hear people say, well, these are great oysters. AOC oysters are boutique oysters. They're not your traditional oysters. And so our oyster farmers work very hard to grow and harvest these oysters, and it's like nurturing and taking care of children. When they are successful, the Grand Isle Port Commission is successful, and the town of Grand Isle is successful, and the whole community that we live in is successful.
Also, there's a couple of great websites that I did attend to, give that information to fit that. If you wanted to send that out, where you get a lot of information about all modern culture. If you go to Grand Isle, you go to any of the restaurants, it's half of this type of way. They can be sold to the public. They do have their wholesale licenses for that to be sold to the rest. And some of these farmers, they have their own websites, and I'll send you their websites. Because there's some of them that we deliver to. So to be aware, these are next to the.
Very good. Thank you, Earl. That was very interesting. I enjoyed now also oysters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. O'Connell. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marty O'Connell. He's going to talk with you all about a project that he has been working on for some time, a project that was funded by the program and you all. Dr. O'Connell is the director of the Necton Research Laboratory, Australian Institute for Environmental Sciences at UNO. So welcome, Dr. O'Connell. Looking forward to hearing you.
First, a personal note, I'm so happy you all voted for the Barrel Bottom project, because I was one of the ones who voted for that. And as you'll see in this talk, I hate it. So today I'm going to talk about some projects we worked on looking for tilapia in Port Sulphur, me and Meg last year. I'm going to first start with a little foreshadowing, talk about another project Meg and I worked on 20 years ago with another invasive species. Then I'm going to talk about the history of tilapia in Port Sulphur, go briefly into the methods we used last year to look for them there, then go into our results and end up with a summary with some insights about this specific project, but also insights about dealing with invasive species in general. And the clicker is. Just a picture of me and Meg in Spahr at Marconi Lagoon. We were studying Rio Grande cichlids back in 2006. I don't know if you can tell by the picture, I'm kind of in a foul mood. We've been sampling the site for 6 months, no cichlids. I was going to use this as a control site. So I'm ticked off for 2 reasons. The first reason, the stupid fish showed up and screwed up my whole statistic. I was going to do a before, after control impact, and now I can no longer use Marconi Lagoon to do this study, show the impacts of the salmon. Ticked off for a second reason, like I just told you, I hate invasive species. On the East Coast where I come from, every stream, river, lake has been screwed up by invasive species. When I moved to Louisiana and I collected zillions of fishes, I would rarely see invasive species. Now, unfortunately, over the last few years, I've seen them occur in more and more places and they're causing a lot more problems. 21st century, a younger colleague told me, you better put a trigger warning in this lecture. Of the age where friends and family are dealing with cancer, and when I talk about invasive species, I tend to use terms that I compare them to cancer. So if I use terms like biopsy, treatment, false positive, false negative, if this upsets you, you can leave right now and you won't hurt my feelings. But realize I see invasive species very similar, being like cancer. All right. The history of tilapia in Port Sulphur. Back in 2008, LDWF found tilapia down there, realized it's going to be a problem. If you don't believe it, tilapia are the #1 bad invasive species around the planet. I've read studies just recently about even the people in China who are raising tilapia, they're getting into where their Asian carp are, and it's a big problem. So LDWF realized it was a huge problem. They went down there and they closed the area. They put a fishery closure, realized that people couldn't catch these things and move them around. And this is something else that humans do a lot. They see something cool and they go, oh, I'm gonna put that in my backyard. So they're doing the right things from day one. They're realizing it's a problem. They're shutting down the fishery. Then finally, they put in rotenone. If you don't know what rotenone is, it's a pesticide. It kills everything. And it came down like a ton of bricks. And that's another thing I'm proud of Louisiana. Probably the proudest I've ever seen. So how quickly and how efficiently it came down with the rotenone and started wiping things out. I've seen controls in other southeastern states that they kind of just don't do it full way. They came down, they knew the severity, the threats to their fisheries, and they really did a good job of trying to wipe these things out. After the rotenone, where's the laser? Upper left-hand corner. That's a picture from a ditch on by the side of Highway 23. The postdoc who was running my research, Tom Lorenz, estimated that 85% of the biomass was tilapia. This is bad. This is your organ. If your organ was 85% cancer, you're going to have to treat that. So this is a huge problem down there. LDWF, after the rotenone, they asked my lab to monitor to see how well was the treatment. Did we get all these things? Are there still a few left? So we are charged to do that. The good people in Nicholls State were charged after the rotenone was done to restock the native fishes. So they understood we're going to wipe everything out, but we're going to get the native fishes back in there once the rotenone is done with this. So we started looking at this, and And in December of 2009, we did find some small individuals. So you might say, oh, look, road didn't work. This is considering how much you had there, 85% adult tilapia. This was a huge issue. This is a huge thing that had to be treated. So we started finding them. We kept monitoring them though. Back in October 2010, we had electroshocking boat out there among other gear types. We could actually see some adults swimming around, but if you ever run an electroshock boat, sometimes you have to adjust it to get the right wavelength to bring up big fish or small fish or something like that. So we knew their adults were there. In December, when it was very cold, 10 degrees Celsius, everyone thinks cold weather's gonna wipe out the tilapia. Well, they didn't. We found males and females with gonads, so they were ready to reproduce again. So this was kind of discouraging. We knew they were there, not in high numbers. We continued working until April of 2011, monitoring out there. And as of April 11, we had 15 total since the road number. But then as we kept collecting beyond that, we went all the way to August 2012, and we couldn't find any more tilapia. So it was kind of bad that they were still there, but we got to the point, well, we're not finding any more. So that was very encouraging. So this is something where it looked like it worked really well. We got most of what was there, considering how large the numbers were when the road gun was applied. What do we do now? I'm going to talk about our methods we use. We use cast nets. This is a method I developed 25 years ago when I was looking for Rio Grande cichlids in Jefferson Parish in the canals of Metairie in Canada. It's very effective for the type of animal we're going after. And it was so effective that one of my graduate students, Will Stein, was working on tarpon. Will was the first scientist to show that tarpon actually spawned off the coast of Louisiana. Up until he came along, everyone said, these are Florida tarpon or these are Yucatan tarpon. No, they're tarpon that spawn right here and are raised in Plaquemines Parish and marshes around here. So he took a hold of this method, and he actually published a paper where he standardized this cast net approach. So this is something that you do, we've been using regularly. It's appropriate, especially going for these animals in these habitats, because you catch both the big ones, the small ones, and everything in between. For this first survey, the post-Rotenone survey, we had a whole big crew out there. We had a postdoc there, we had a boat captain, we had graduate students, we had techs. We went out there and we used cast nets, but we also used electroshocking boats. We also used seine, and we also used minnow traps. We were trying to get a really big picture of what's going on. And this was like an armored platoon going out there. Man, first of all, you know, the state came in with the Rotenone, they picked the snot out of it, and then we came in and made sure we're going to get whatever leftovers were there. Back last year, it was just me and Meg, two wily biologists going out there, like little guerrilla fighters in the weeds. But we were going in, it was a small scale, it was limited money, but we were going out there kind of like a biopsy. Let's do a little probing here, let's get some bloods here. Hopefully we won't find this cancer. And that was one of my concerns because it was just the two of us. Were we going to get a false negative? In other words, well, we don't know. We took these samples, but it's not the same as we did after the Rotenone. So it was interesting to see. Frankly, I didn't know what I was going to find. I wasn't expecting to find anything. So I'll jump right into the results here. This is most of the impact zone. The dots that I'll be showing you here are the sites we sampled. On our first trip down there, we sampled up near Diamond, the first two sites, and then we took a lunch break. We went down to the fishing pier down in Port Sulphur, the Civic Fishing Pier. That's a good place because you can go to bathroom there and eat lunch. It's pleasant. And then on our last site of the day, we went to this site. And here's how it went down. We spread out, we knew the site we had to sample at. I think I threw my fourth cast net, and Meg was about 50 meters to my left. And I pull it up, and I see 5 things in the cast net. And I let out a very loud expletive. And Meg says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Effing tilapia." And it was that same feeling I had when we found that Rio Grande cichlid in Marconi Lagoon. It's just, it hurts me to see these animals back. It's like, oh my, the cancer is back. So we have to kind of do something about this. We have to realize, well, we got to choose biopsy. We got to focus on this organ. We can't just go look everywhere for stuff. We're going to have to focus our search to see how far this cancer has spread. So we went back there, and these are the 5 fishes that we collected. And I'm going to show you the actual fishes we collected here. And We went back there the second time. And ironically enough, this site is where we took this picture of the 85% tilapia back when Tom was running the thing. The same site, it's a little bit grown over, it's where the culvert goes under Highway 23. When we went back, we found more tilapia. We first focused our second trip kind of northwest of where we found these, and we found the same organisms, a little bit higher numbers, someplace a little bit lower. Now, we'll also look at the size here. There's a ruler there, it's 20 centimeters. So these are tiny organisms. Most of them are going to be juveniles. But they're there. And we saw them north of where we first found them. And we went back for the next trip. And we found even more farther south, all the way down right behind the YMCA in Port Sulphur. So this is not statistics yet. This is just pictures of fish. But you saw all the fishes we collected. And you can see there's kind of a density. There's a higher density in the middle section, and at the distal edges, we have lower numbers. Again, no statistics, but it's telling us perhaps we have an animal that's been spreading from this central point, going northwest, going southeast, and we kind of focus where we need to if we try to eliminate the animals that are there. All right, some real statistics now. This is a non-metric multidimensional scaling graph. To keep it simple, these are all the collections, all our collections from 2024, and with the cabinets and all the collections from the different beer types back after the big road post-road sample. All you need to know is if these are the composition of the assemblage that we collected, the types of species that we collected, the numbers. So if the dots are close to each other, that means the composition of species are similar. If the dots are far apart, that means they're very different from each other. What we've seen here with our oval, and we tested this statistically, is that animals we pulled up in our catchments in 2024 were a different composition. So there's been a significant change in what the animals collected in catchments are between 2010 and what we did in 2024. And when we went farther with that analysis, we saw that the animals that were driving the change from 2010 and 2024 were a decline of native species that were there. So we have a different assemblage, we have fewer of some of these major players, and what's going on is a decimation of the native species. And Meg and I can tell this ourselves. If we sample away from this ditch, you're catching regular native critters. In this ditch now, we had a decline in some of the major players of native fishes. So this got me to thinking, and again, going with the whole idea of having something that needs to be eliminated and losing entire communities and assemblages of fishes. What are the long-term impacts? And I don't agree with the statement. I've heard this a lot from relatives. You know, oh, sometimes cancer treatment is worse than the cancer. I don't know, but when you wipe something out, there are long-term impacts. I've been doing this long enough, which is scary in itself, that I've seen this repeated. And this reminds me when I was a graduate student at Virginia Tech, we would go to the Clinch River, the Powell River, we would do surveys for freshwater mussels. But then we do a survey on the North Fork of the Holston, and there was nothing there. And for most of the 20th century, there's a chemical plant in Saltville on the North Fork of the Holston, and they had multiple spills of mercury and things like that. Even though they closed that plant in 1972, we were sampling in late 80s, early 90s. 20 years later, it was still pretty much dead. So I'm not saying we needed the treatment, but if you're going to have an invasive species, you're going to have to deal with it, or you're going to let it get out of control, and the treatment has to be chemical, you're going to have impacts for a long, long time. If they're not going to, native fish aren't going to magically bounce back. You're going to have an impact for a long time. And then I started thinking even more about our work. Meg and I have also been working on Bayou St. John in the middle of New Orleans for 25 years now. And back in 1955, they drained the whole damn thing to get rid of it. So we're starting from scratch from 80 years ago. And one reason they drained it was water ice that we were just talking about, another invasive species. So even though it's a fun place to work, I have a graduate student, Allie Jones, who just finished a thesis, and we're improving the habitat. We're doing better management, opening gates of connectivity, and we've seen improvement of biodiversity and biomass. But it's not the same. When we sample there, it's not the same as when we sample outside of that control system, because it was wiped out 80 years ago, and we still see that signal today. So that's something to keep in mind when I go into the results of this. So in summary, I don't have a monitor up here. You can read it yourselves. It's a couple of sentences from the final, report we put in. It's disturbing that we sampled the snot out of it for multiple years, we caught 15 tilapia. Meg and I go schlepping down there a couple of few trips, and we catch 54. That's something should be a red flag for most people, considering what they went to and the money that went into treating the stuff in the first invasion. So what should we do? And I get a lot of this when I talk to folks about this. Should we rope them? Talking to, I have connections, I see LDWF people here right now, and they said, I don't think it's gonna happen, Marty. It's expensive. There's a lot of things going on there. If I was a billionaire, the first thing I would do is buy a bunch of rope and go down and kill them all. That's not gonna happen on my salary. So that's the reality of what we're looking at here. Next step down, electrofishing. This might be the most realistic approach, but still, that's a lot of money to get a whole crew down there. It's not the most fun habitat to work in. Put up some block nets, start shocking, try to do a block net by block net time so you're not driving them away from the shocker, and try to get them to do that for a year or two. Maybe that'll bring down the numbers on that. Next option is kind of bunny huggy and touchy feely. Oh, we're going to use education, but I think this is getting better in Louisiana. I think people, if you tell them what's going on and why it is bad to have invasive species, it does set in. There's this great angler, fisherman, Mark Hood, who has M-hood fishing, and he just does all sorts of fishing in Plaquemines Parish, and he fishes for bluegill, for bait, and then he fishes the Mississippi River with catfish. But at the point, you see him pulling up Rio Grande cichlids, and he makes a point and says, all right, these are invasive, you're not supposed to throw them back, they're bad, and he uses them, but he says it's not good for catfish bait, but he doesn't put them back, he dispatches them, uses them for something else. So I think people do realize that this is a problem, and it should be something we should be trying to get rid of. Maybe a positive note, the current situation, these tiny fishes that we see kind of dispersing from the central spot in the city, remind me of probably what happened with Rio Grande cichlids. I did dispersion models, and the very first cichlid showed up in Orleans Parish in 1996. But all my dispersion models said they were released probably in the mid-80s and dispersed from a central or a couple of central spots in Metairie through the canals. So they're kind of dispersing under the radar, and no one's catching a 10-inch cichlid or a 10-inch tilapia or 10 centimeters tilapia. So these things spread and people don't realize it. Maybe this is where this current invasion is. We go in there and keep and knock them down while they don't become 85% adult biomass. Also, another mentality I've developed over the years, like, you're probably not going to wipe these things out immediately. Only if you're really lucky, you get them when they initially show up. We need to circle the wagons. We need to keep an eye on these things. We need to wipe them out when we can, keep their population numbers down as well as we can, invest into doing that. I'm hoping that some great fish geneticist in the future will figure out a way to have a genetic strain you put in a male that just produces males or something like that, like they're doing with the Zika virus with mosquitoes. Circle the wagons until someone in the future, maybe using AI, comes up with a way to figure out how to wipe these things out genetically. Let me reiterate. LDWF did a great thing in 2009, even though we still have tilapia down there. They came down very heavily, did the right thing. Nothing went wrong there. We knew there was a possibility these things would get through. And then you get going back to the cancer. We've kept the cancer at bay for 14 or 15 years. Now we probably have to start addressing that cancer again before it takes over the organ again. Treatments, whether it's cancer or invasive species, is going to be problematic. So when people say, oh, I don't know if this invasive, this non-native is going to cause problems, is it going to prey on native fishes, is going to compete with them? That you should realize if you get to a situation where it gets that out of control and you're going to have to get it with rope no, you're going to cause a lot of damage, maybe permanent damage to that habitat. And stress that to the people. It's like, this is one of the problems, not just about competition for nest sites or predation on native fishes. It's about destroying that whole system, trying to get rid of these invasive species. And then finally, this struck me too, and again, going back to work I've done in other states. Ditches matter. There's a lot of people out there who rely on they don't have licenses, recreational licenses. They are out there. You can see if you fish around here, you see the broken bill tray or the broken 5-gallon bucket, and someone's been fishing there. They need that for food. I saw this in the mountains of Appalachia. You see folks out there day after day, and they're not doing it for kicks and giggles, they're doing it to bring food. I saw it even more in rural Mississippi. I would say half the population of Mississippi are fishing for food from ditches like this or small creeks. And then the last example, going back to New Orleans, after Katrina, LGWF restocked City Park in Bayou St. John, and we helped them. We actually put tags in all the bass with the my office number at UNO. So if someone caught the bass, they could call me. I could get size so that we could talk about it. After that, maybe 4 or 5 people call me and they say, "Oh, what's this about?" And I explain, and they talk to me. And there's one old fellow who liked talking, New Orleans. He called me on a regular basis, and talked about what was going on. And he said, "I ran some other guy the other day, and I told him about your tags." And he pulled out a Ziploc, and it had 30 of your tags in the Ziploc. And I said, "Well, why did he call me?" He says, "He doesn't have a license, he's afraid of the government, and he just eats these things." And then about a year later, me and the inland crew, the LW inland crew, went down there and electroshocked the lagoons. And I kept looking for my tags, I kept looking for bass. None of my tag fish came up. So within a year, they wiped that system out. That's how much kind of under the radar pressure, even in a big city like New Orleans, people go out there. So this is kind of just another element to point out, if you have an invasive species, you might get a situation where you have to deal with wiping it out with roadnumb. If you wipe it out with roadnumb, you're gonna have a hard time bringing your native fishes back. Because it's not the same as having that thing being there for hundreds of years and establishing, creating community. And then if you don't have a community there, you're losing natural resources that some of the people who rely on that, we don't realize are relying on that, they're going to actually suffer from having this invasive species loss too. And with that, I will say thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connell. That's really interesting. Terrifying, really. Are there any questions? Comments? Yes, Gary.
Is this the same tilapia that you found in Jefferson Parish?
Jefferson Parish? You mean, no, Rio Grande cichlids were the ones I had in Jefferson Parish. So I work with Rio Grande cichlids.
Is it this cichlid, is this the same one?
No, this is the aquaculture. It's the same species that was known back in 2009. Here's nothing. The first slide I said Boreochromis Spahr. And I've collected tilapia in places out of Mississippi and Virginia and Baton Rouge and down here. A lot of these aquaculture ones, they look, you can tell they're a certain aureus or something, or niloticus, but there's a lot of mixing going on. If you talk to the tilapia guys, their genes are really mixed up. They're trying to get them domesticated. So it's really, I have a hard time saying it's pure or something or other. But the stuff we collected was probably aureus, probably the dominant genes that are Boreochromis Spahr, blue tilapia. Good.
And have you sampled outside the drainage system?
Over the levees?
Yes.
We did that. In fact, we did that 3 times. And we didn't catch it. In the initial survey, we sampled outside there too. We didn't catch any tilapia, but we heard anecdotal stuff that they were outside. But again, when we sampled outside, maybe I didn't sample outside, we're heavy cast nets. We were catching native stuff and pogies, and it's all very rich. The minute you get into the ditch, it's fairly barren when it comes to native critters.
And there's a freshwater reservoir in Fort Sulphur. Have you sampled in there?
We didn't sample there in 2024, and the crew went in there a couple of times, but it's hard to get in there. A lot of more trespassing signs this time, 14 years later, and some of our sites were actually dried up, so we couldn't get in there. So there's a lot, because in fact, there's a lot of, not to get talking about things changing. It's really shocking how much things have changed down there in 14 years. We hadn't been down there. It seems like not a lot of residential folks there, a lot of fancy trailers, a lot more dead trees outside the levee system. So that was a lot of little things like that were kind of shocking to be here this long and see changes like that. They're probably, I was just reading this paper from Brazil. They are swim through full salinity water to change gas. This is what's shocking when I started working at Rio Grande City, it's put nominally freshwater fish, and then all of a sudden, they're spreading my dispersion on the side, well, they're going through Lake Pontchartrain, all of that can't be, right? You know, it was saltier back then, it was like 2000 when we had this, drought, and we had salinities like 5, 6, 7, and we would see Rio Grande cichlids on their nest in 6 parts, 7 parts per thousand, and they're fighting off blue crabs and mullet from getting on their nest. So I think, and I try to emphasize this, all bets are off with invasive. They're gonna go through, and whether they're freshwater or something, one of the things that I know raising fish for so many decades, if you want a simple treatment for a freshwater fish that has a disease, you dump a bunch of salt in there, you know, it's a way they can kind of deal with it, regulate it. So people saying, well, the salt water is gonna hold on, I just don't see that happening.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you, Dr. O'Connell. I'm curious if there have been any, I guess, preliminary discussions with the parish or with any state agencies or anybody else about how to address the current situation.
I've talked to some people in this room, Rob Bushbaugh is very much interested in this up at LV. He's a state invasive species guy, and he's angry about it, but he's also realistic about what can be done. Like I said, like I outlined, I don't think there's money for road known, but if we could get a federal grant, I thought about that. If we could get a grant from someone that cares about stuff like this, and I'm not doing that, I don't do the electroshock boats, that stuff anymore, but there are other young fish people in the state who could probably get down there and come up with some kind of control approach, whether it's electrofishing or something like that. But, yeah, officially, no, I'm just a scientist telling you all what I saw.
Hey, anything else? We're almost ready for crawfish. We have one more. Thank you, Dr. O'Connell. Are there any public comments about anything? Yep. Right, State of the Coast is coming up in 2 weeks. So I'll see a bunch of you guys out there. Any other comments? Okay, you want to make a motion with your name to adjourn? Dwayne, number 1, David number 2. All right, thank y'all. All in favor of adjourn? All right, I hope everybody stays here and enjoys the crawfish with us. Thank you.